Let's talk about running with our rifle. We're gonna exit the position. How do we actually handle the gun on the way there? And then entering. Running with the rifle is something we see pretty often, especially on social media or YouTube or anything like that. But it's a skill that we need to have. And while it might seem like, dude, just run with your gun, and then shoot the target, right? Absolutely, that's part of it. However, there is some things that we can do to kind of make this better. One, to get out of position, and then two, to get on target quickly and take those shots. So to do that, when we talk about this, we're going to talk about leaving that position, right, or what they call the exit, and then running with the gun itself, and then entering the position, or getting prepped, ready to go, so we can take those shots sooner. And to do that, what we did is we brought in Justin from Universal Sports Strength. You guys might remember him from the last video where he broke down Steve and I some of our movements and everything, and he's going to help us out today with a little bit of that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it and excited to be back. And one of the things I've really enjoyed is working with athletes from a variety of sports: rugby, lacrosse, soccer, and even more recently in the military tactical environment and special forces. Human movement is the same, and from one sport to the next, one person to the next, a lot of the principles are consistent with that. So looking forward to kind of looking at some of the basic principles, and then how just some small shifts in positioning and just mindset and preparation can make a big difference in the movement.
Perfect. Gear breakdown. For our ear protection, we've got the Auto Engineering noise barriers. Ripcord Industries rifle with our Leupold LCO and a mod light flashlight. Pistol, we're running the Staccato P with a DP Pro, Blade Tech mag carriers and mounting system, along with an S-Tac Kiwi pouches on the backside. And last but not least, our BAER Solutions Wojtek belt, which you can get on our website. What kind of shoes you wear on the range? We like Ultras, they're pretty comfy. So what are we doing and how do we set this up? So Justin and I, all we do is we set up a cone here right where we're at, and about 10 yards away, we set up another cone for our target. And all we're gonna be doing is we're gonna be moving from our first cone to our second cone. And we're gonna break that down and how we can save some time. Rocking back and forth is one thing we talked about, loading and everything else, and get that knee shin angle. But what we can do to get out of this position quickly and get there. So the exit will be here, and then we'll enter that next cone and then take our shots. So looking at this, the next logical thing is, well, why do we train this stuff? I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You know what I mean? Like, we see this stuff a lot. People talk about it, you've been moving your whole life, just shoot the gun and move where you need to go. It's like, yeah, but if you want to be good at it, maybe there's some things you can do to make it better, right? Yeah. So like one thing that we did, Justin, was we always looked at some of the best shooters in the world, right? Like take your JJ Rakazas and your Christian Seilers, and your, I think his name Max Leogrando's phenomenal rifle shooter, dude.
Yeah.
Like all these guys, they break down moving everything else, but they get really, really good at it. And if they're gonna be good, well, they kind of move like an athlete, and there's probably a lot of similarities, right?
Yeah.
So with that said, we can look at it from that perspective. This is just performance. The other thing we can do is we can look at it from a defensive standpoint, right? Or the tactical word. If we look at that, let's imagine, okay, so from a citizen standpoint, someone breaks into your house, you got a home invasion, you grab your gun, and what are you gonna do? You're gonna run to that front door, right? You gotta stop them where they're at. So you might run to where you need to get, and then have to break down and slow down, and then be ready to take shots when you need to. Another thing to look at is probably our law enforcement. There's actually a lot of good body cam shootings and things like that, and officer-involved shootings that you can see. Good example. Have you seen that video by Erik Schall?
Yeah.
If you haven't seen it, I'll send it to you, but it's a case for practical shooting in law enforcement. We'll link it down in the description. Eric's got a video in there where he talks about decelerating. That's a really good skill for a cop. They're full run, and then they got to decelerate and then actually take those shots. So there's some examples of it too, and that are real life situations. So that's generally our why and why we want to do it. And also just let's get gooder at stuff, So first, let's go ahead and get into this, right? So Justin, we talked about this earlier. We know we kind of got two parts to this, right? Well, actually, technically three parts. One is the exiting or leave the position, right? And then we have traveling on the way there in the run, which is our second part, and then entering the position at the end. So first, let's break down kind of exiting position. I'm just gonna talk about a few things that I go over in class and teach people, and then Justin's gonna fill in and give us all that nerdy stuff, right? All the good, you know what I mean? So, a couple things, right? So one thing that we know, we're in a position, rifle, pistol, it doesn't really matter, right? Yeah. We want to be comfortable when we take those shots. However, there's kind of a balance. I want to get in a position that's good in athletics so I can leave from that position. Now, I want to stay loaded is what we always tell people.
Yep.
Stay loaded right here so that when you actually do push off and run or do whatever you need to do, we don't need to drop down too much and actually load our legs to push off, right?
Yep.
The other aspect of that is some people just stand up. Now, it's kind of arguable, you know, which one's better. It's like, well, first off, you got to hit the target. You know what I'm saying? However, if we stand up here and take our shots, when we go to move, a lot of times we'll see that the drop down, roll that knee forward and then push off, or we see that like stutter step as they push off from here. And then lastly, the third thing, and I was bad about this too, you actually called it out on that last video, was the rocking back, right? So we'll see that rocking back. We take our shots and then that loading the back leg here and then pushing forward. And the reason that stuff isn't good is because everything equates to time, right? You're saving steps and you're saving time. So looking at all that, why are some of the reasons, Justin, that we want to do that, right? Like, I mean, it's pretty obvious to stay loaded, but how would you go into that more?
Yeah, no, I mean, you covered it pretty well, and I think the reasons why, again, goes back to time, but also just efficiency.
Yeah.
You know, you look at just some of the small injuries. I mean, the number of times that somebody, you know, tweaks an ankle, or, I mean, how many people are actually training their groin? You know, and then
I just started recently because you wrote my program. So.
But you know, anytime that like you demonstrate kind of with that drop step, right? Like that's opening up the hip, and if somebody doesn't have the right hip mobility, now we're exposing, you know, certain areas of our body to movements it might not be ready for. So if we're preloading that, then we're kind of telling our body, hey, this is how we're going to take that next step, and we're kind of minimizing any inefficiencies and as you said, we're kind of playing one step ahead, right? Like we got to take this shot here, but we also want to be prepped to move into that next shot.
That makes sense. And you're talking about opening the hips. So in that last video, that's something that Steve and I were both doing. Steve was doing it even more so than me, but I did it a little bit too. So it was, you go to take that stutter step and then the hips open up this way. Well, we're trying to go that way. That's just wasted time, and it's energy, right? Or production, force production, whatever you want to call it. I don't have fancy words.
Yeah.
So all that stuff. But the other part is, wherever my hips go, my gun goes. So if I'm lined up here and I generally push down and settle straight into it, my gun's generally going to stay forward. But as soon as I kind of take that stutter step back, and if I open that foot and hips, that's pulling my gun off target. So if you do that too soon, you know, you start to initiate that movement and you're still breaking that shot, that could be pulling that round off to the side too. So let's go over that real quick. So just from here, right, kind of go through, how would you coach me through this?
So the biggest thing is, you know, you mentioned the last time you were sitting back onto your heels, and as you say, as someone standing up tall, they're going to have more tendency to do that. So, you know, you made the comment about, you know, kind of getting the shin forward. What I would say is a lot of people are going to tend to, you know, they'll interpret that as get onto their toes, right? And by doing that, they're going to lift their heel, which is going to put their foot in a non-optimal position, or not the greatest position. So I always kind of say the midfoot, right, or the ball of the foot, kind of right behind the ball, so where you're balanced enough for that shot, but then you're also prepped to take that step when you need to. So probably some terms that you probably use is going to be soften the knees, lower the center of gravity, right, and as you say, keep those hips square. I have to throw out that forbidden C word, the core, right, but that is what's going to help stabilize those hips, like you said, to minimize any extra or inefficient movement there.
Cool. So what I want to do this a couple times and just explain to them what I'm doing as we do it, right? So first off, I'm just going to start off. I'm going to put my weight a little bit more on my heels. Let's see that, and let's see what that does. Okay. So starting off, weight's a little bit more on my heels. I'm just going to be slightly a little bit more upright. Okay. So from here, good. Got to move out of position. Stand by. Move.
Yeah, so right there, and that's what I love about this kind of surface, right? If we're doing this stuff in a gym or on a track, we're not going to get this kind of feedback. So, you know, even just looking right here, we can see how your weight shifted, right? You kicked up the gravel and divoted here. So, again, you were kind of prepping for it, but that weight shifted to the outside of the foot, then you had to roll back in and prep.
Got it.
Again, because, right, we were on the back side of that foot.
Cool. I am sore as hell, by the way. Dude, I squatted day before yesterday. I'm still sore. So, all right. Oof. Those hammies. Okay, so let's do it again. This time what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put my weight on the balls of the feet, just a little bit, and have that heel up, right?
Okay.
And then I'm gonna ask you a question after that. So,
okay.
All right, so weight more on the balls of the feet, right here. Stand by.
All right. So yeah, so now when we're looking at the immediate feedback, right, a little bit bigger divot on both feet.
Yep.
But because you were so tall, right, that heel was elevated so much here, you still had to drop that heel to load that calf and take that step. So it's almost, we've kind of demonstrated both ends of the extreme.
That makes sense.
You know, in terms of being on the heel versus being up on the toe, right? It's about finding that in between.
Okay. So it's time. Feel the midfoot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now I'll put some divots in this. I'll fix the range here in a minute. All right. So same thing. This time I'm just gonna put it more in the midfoot of the foot. Bend down right here, right? Stand by.
Yep. So right there, a lot less movement. Might have been a little, I mean, for me, it's some of this stuff just becomes kind of second nature to see it. But, right? Might have been a little hesitation, but that was probably more because anytime we're handling anything else, there's going to be a delay in the execution. But if we're looking at like body height, if we're looking at shift of the weight, everything stayed a little more central.
Yep.
And this is what we covered last time as well, right? Is that I was really trying to emphasize, hey, let's drive off this back foot. Or no, actually it was the other way. I was trying to emphasize drive off the front foot, right? And you guys found out that, hey, in this environment, driving off this back foot is going to be more just quicker out of the blocks. So
well, it was weird when I started just putting weight on the front foot, you know what I mean, and feeling it. It was like, it wasn't I had weight on the front foot or the back foot, it was I had weight on both.
Yeah.
And like, I'm pushing with that, I feel like I got loaded quicker and just out of the hole. You know what I mean? But there's also that little bit like that rolling forward, you know, I can kind of cheat it and then go, you know? So let's do that again a couple times.
Yep.
Hopefully my legs will get warmed up here. I should have stretched, bud. Should have done some warm-ups before we started. I'm like, oh man. All right.
How many times do you see people doing that at the range?
Not a whole lot, dude.
Probably not enough.
Probably not nearly enough. All right, cool. So do this again. Let's start off. So stand by. Just gonna get in here, just load that little bit. Stand by. How'd that feel out of the hole that time?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say even less hesitation than the rep before that.
It felt a little bit better.
Yeah.
Cool. So big keys on this as we do it, exiting. Feel that midfoot versus the heel or the forefoot, right? Feel the entire foot, right? Instead of having the weight on one foot or the other, just try and feel both feet evenly on the ground, right? Yep. And then from there, push off, try to keep less hesitation, but if we have that knee forward a little bit, that's gonna help a lot.
100%.
All right, I got a question.
Yeah, man.
So, speaking of loading on the front leg, does that mean just swinging the other leg forward, like, takes away having to load on it, and it's just faster to take that step forward? Or do you still need to brace off that back foot at all?
So you're saying if I just keep that pressure on that front leg kind of the whole time?
Yeah, and just swing your leg
all
forward.
That there, and then all I have to do is swing this forward versus actually pushing off with the back leg.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I would turn it back to you as the shooting expert and say, well, how stable is that going to be from a shooting perspective?
So like, it kind of depends on what you can get away with too. You know what I mean? Like how far the target is, you know, how big it is, how much shooting area you have, how fast you shoot, all that.
Yeah.
But like, there's always going to be a time where you're probably more weight on one side or the other. But if I'm moving forward, I probably want to have my weight forward a little bit, right? But is it more beneficial to just forget about this leg and just step it forward, or do I still want to push off with that leg too? You know what I mean?
So if we're talking about like max efficiency and optimizing, you know, the output here, you're still going to want some push off of it, right? Okay. One of the coaches I learned from a long time ago said when you're training for sprinting, train like a sprinter.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about movement right here, even Olympic level athletes, when they're in the blocks, right, their feet are staggered just similar to what obviously tighter, but they're still getting push off of that back foot.
Okay.
So there's something to be said for having a little bit of weight back there and getting a little bit of drive.
Okay. So it kind of be like popping out of the hole. It helps you kind of with both feet kind of pop out of that hole a little quicker versus just swinging that foot and stepping out of the hole.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, so advertisements and sponsors, right? So first off, thank you to Vertx. They send us stuff all the time and they sponsor the channel. So one thing they got coming out, it's actually today, the day we're filming. So we're gonna try to get that out as soon as possible. There's a new Siege line of bags right here. Got the 15-liter kind of sling bag and the 25-liter backpack. It's kind of set up more like a rucksack kind of thing that you'd be issued in the military. They're pretty slick though. In the way they fit, adjustments, padding, and all that. And the one thing that they do have, like everything, they come set up with your armor inside if you purchase that. So it's got your slots for armor in both. Other than that, full sun hoodie and brand new pants, the Trail Slackers that they got out now. Leupold is our next sponsor. They've been working with us for quite a while. I've been a big fan of Leupold, as you guys know, especially the DP Pro here on our pistol today, which is our Staccato P, right? So we've been a big fan of Leupold. We appreciate them and everything they do with the Patrol HD 1-6. We got some new reticles coming out and some other stuff that I wish Nick would let me talk about, but he won't. But anyway, we appreciate it, man. So hopefully by the end of the day, we're gonna have you some new stuff to show. It's gonna be pretty awesome. So now that we've covered exiting the position or leaving the position, we gotta talk about what we're gonna do on the way there with the rifle. So we have two options. One, we can keep that buttstock in the shoulder, or two, we can break it out of the shoulder for our movement. And I would say there's a line where you want to do one versus the other, right? So first let's look at keeping the buttstock in the shoulder. If I'm making a shorter distance, right, where I know I'm not really going to get up to speed, and it's important that once I break my shots, I pretty much just have the gun prepped, ready to go and be on that target as soon, well, we always want that, but because the distance is short, even sooner, right, and have those sights ready, I'll probably just keep the buttstock in my shoulder. And generally how that looks, I'm just going to go halfway here. So if we start off, right here, everything's good, take my shots, bang, bang, and I go to safe, right? As soon as I go to safe, I just keep the buttstock in the shoulder, right back up and on the target, right? Now, if we're going longer distances and say we got to go to this other cone, maybe it makes sense to break the buttstock out of the shoulder because we're going to be going a little bit faster. Our top speed's probably going to get a little bit higher, right? So looking at that, let's come back. So coming back here, right? This time we're gonna go all the way to that 10-yard cone, and you're gonna see me break the gun over the shoulder like this. I like to go over the shoulder or just up higher in general to kind of pump my arms here. And then when they enter, flip it back and drive the gun straight out. So doing the same thing, stand by a little farther, bang, bang, coming out. Right back into position, right? So it feels like when I do that, Justin, and I pull up, and as soon as I break the gun, I kind of pull my arm here like that. It kind of helps me pop out of position. But would you say there's any other pros and cons to this? One, keeping a little bit more rigid and stationary with that gun, right? It's not moving versus actually pumping your arms.
Yeah, no, great question. And what I see a lot is just, right, we talked earlier about having the hips, keeping the hips square, right? Yeah. Hips are gonna, or the gun's gonna go where the hips are going. But as we're running, this might kind of lend people to exaggerate some upper body inefficiencies in terms of, right, as they start to swing, because each arm can't move freely, right, it's moving with the rifle. Now they start getting extra rotation with the shoulders. So, you know, if I'm coming in and I over rotate this way as I'm going into step, my upper body is starting to rotate back. Of course, you're going to know better than I will that might throw the gun off as I'm coming onto target a little bit, versus if I'm able to kind of keep those shoulders a little bit tighter and stay a little more rigid as I come in, I've just got a stronger base here to support that rifle as I'm coming up.
That makes sense. Cool. Let's talk about how we actually get to this position and we work our entry, as they call it, right? So kind of a quick side note, a lot of this stuff comes from competition shooting, right? Because there's really no better place to go and set up a stage and run it and do all this stuff. The skills are the same, man, right? Movement skills are movement skills, right? How you apply them in your tactic, that's completely different. You know what I'm saying? But like, well, not completely different. There's a lot of similarities there too, but that's a different aspect or a different viewpoint. All this stuff applies to no matter what you're doing, okay? So with that said, let's talk about this entry. There's kind of four things we want to cover here with the entry. One is that we want to look where we're going. 2, we want to be able to decelerate if we need to. 3 is what we call break foot, stop foot. And I got that from a guy, Keith Tyler, and I'll explain about him in a minute. And then 4th is just presenting the gun, right, and getting it onto target. So we're going to look where you want to go, decelerate, break foot, stop foot. I really like that term and how he uses it. And then softening that position a little bit as we present our gun towards the target, right? So first, let's talk about like look where you want to go, right? Sounds pretty obvious, I would imagine, like look where you want to go. But what I've found, we actually just did a class in Jackson, Tennessee this past weekend. And some of the guys, like we were doing this in width, especially like going the sideways, and they wouldn't look where they're going, right? So they were always a little bit off, or it caused them to be extra cautious coming into the position. You know what I mean? It just caused them to be slow. You know what I'm saying? They just had their eyes downrange the whole time and kind of real choppy and weird and unathletic looking. It was goofy as shit. You know what I'm saying? So I think just looking where you want to go keeps you on task. But there comes a point where I'm like, okay, I don't need to look where I want to go anymore. You know what I mean? I need to look towards the target. So that probably happens about 3 steps out, depending. But once I get here and I decide to hit my break foot, stop foot, so as I decelerate, I'm going to come decelerate to about here, about a yard off, and I have my break foot comes in and then my stop foot here. That's about the point. Once I decelerate and I got a step for my break foot, then generally, look, you don't have to look at your position anymore, right? The other thing we found too was funny, and I don't know why, man, but like we would tell people when they weren't looking where they want to go, at least for a few seconds, they would come in and kind of stomp in. And they would want to step in with their forefoot, like they're tippy-toeing into position and not being comfortable on what's on the ground. You know what I mean? And willing to just step. So they would come in and be like here and do like do this and then just like stomp with that other foot versus rolling and absorbing. So the second part is decelerating. And this is the part I want to talk to you about especially. Yep. Coming in at speed, we know we need to, like a football player, you know, before they go for that tackle, they start to break their feet underneath them and control their speed so they can make that tackle. They don't overshoot it, right? How do we decelerate properly, right? Or what is the concept behind that? It's pretty simple. You just slow your feet down and keep them underneath you. But is there anything we want to make sure we don't do? Is that too big of steps or anything like that?
Yeah, no, and I think this is where, you know, guys like you and I are fortunate that, you know, we are the height that we are because our center of gravity is already lower.
Yeah,
and I would say, yeah, to all the bullies in junior high. But I think that's probably the issue, especially taller shooters are going to make, is that they're going to be running tall, and then they've got to drop that center of gravity again. And as we already talked about, right, just the more times they're changing here, it's just going to make their visual that much different. And then of course from the running perspective too, you know, if I'm coming in tall, now I'm top heavy, and so that could get me over the top a little bit more, which is going to throw you out of a strong shooting position. So keeping that center of gravity nice and low and stable, and then like you said, I'd say a lot of it is going to be kind of in the quote unquote pregame, right? Like if you're at the competition, it's surveying the course a little bit and understanding, okay, well, I've got a solid patch here, we got some loose gravel here, because your steps might change, you know, if it's smaller pea gravel versus, you know, more firm stuff like this. But again, center of gravity down, and then key thing on the brakes is just getting that foot out in front, and like you said, hitting that heel and just rolling in. I'd say a lot of it there is going to come from your training off the range, in terms of having that strength and that stability in the knee and the ankle, that once that foot comes here, boom, everything can fire and just kind of lock in place there. You're not kind of wobbling back and forth. Yeah.
So do you feel like when we're decelerating, should you feel like your feet are just maybe a little bit in front of your hips as you do that, right, to absorb that? And then as you slow down, your hips start to come more up over your heels and your ankles?
100%.
Okay, so as you're coming in, you're kind of leading with your feet a little bit more, shorter, choppier steps to control your weight, and as those hips come forward, that's when we settle in to enter. Would that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So let's look at that a couple times, right? All we're gonna do is we're gonna run in and we'll look where I wanna go and just start to decelerate, okay? So as we do that, tell me what I'm doing right and tell me what I'm doing wrong. I'm sure there's gonna be a lot that I'm doing wrong, all right? So, cool. So I'm gonna start from back here a little bit. I guess I might as well do the whole thing. All right, so here, weapons clear. There we go. All right, so get up here, stand by, bang. Oh, hold on. Bang, bang, How'd that feel coming in with the feet? Like I felt they were a little bit in front of me, broke that down, looked where I wanted to go, and then averted my eyes back up.
Yeah, no, it looked real good. I mean, again, we already talked about you and I are already close to the ground, right? But you kept those, you didn't get too low, and you weren't coming in hot. So as you started to come in, it was real good too, because once that, what do we call it, stop foot, once that hit, right, you were already in that shooting position that you wanted to be. It's not like you had to get here and then resettle into it.
Okay.
Which looked good.
Let's do it a different way. Let's try and do it the wrong way and see what happens. So this time be a little bit more upright.
Yep.
Right? I'm not gonna do as good of a job decelerating and then on that stop foot too. So I'm gonna stay a little bit more upright versus getting low and absorbing it in. Stand by, bang, bang.
Yep. So what I noticed there was it took you a few extra steps to come in, and then as you said, right, you're already tall, so if we're really kind of splitting hairs here, you could see that weight shift over that front foot and then have to settle back in to that shooting position.
And what happened to my sights, like when I did it the first time, it's like my sights were there, but they kind of float just barely up as we enter the position, versus the second time, the sights were up, and as I came in, they dipped down and came back up just slightly. Yeah. So that was a lot of movement on that target, which is an AC zone steel at about, I don't know, 15-ish, maybe a little farther, something like that. But the sights tend to move on that target down and above a lot more than the first time when we seem to do it right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's talk about this break foot, stop foot thing, and let's talk about softening the position slightly. So I got this, I've said pretty much the exact same thing, but I was talking to a dude, Keith Tyler. Yeah, you were out here that day he came out. Yeah. Cool dude, man, great guy. Tyler Firearms Institute out near Jackson, Tennessee, and Pinson, I think is the town. But they're out there by Jackson, Memphis area, right? So he says break foot, stop foot. And I was like, oh, that's super simple. You know what I mean? Like, that's great. You know what I mean? Like, hey, instead of just break foot, stop foot, right? So your front foot, that's gonna be, if I come into the position, my left foot's gonna be leading, well, that's my stop foot, right? So my last step is my stop, and my second to last is my break. And the big part of that was that heel to toe as we come in. Whereas a lot of people tend to just step, and one reason is they usually wear shoes that aren't like trail shoes or, you know, flexible shoes with ankle mobility. They wear these big, heavy, like hiking boots, like they're about to summit Everest. I'm like, dude, you don't need those. You know what I mean? Like, that's ridiculous. But it does affect how we move, right? And they tend to kind of clunk into position. So looking at that, with that break foot, right? So as we're coming in and staying low, that break foot heel is really important to roll on, but also is the front, right? Because that's kind of how I soften the position so I don't hit in hard and jar my sights. Yep. But I mean, his term of just break foot, stop foot is probably the simplest that I like. That's what I say now. We were saying pretty much the same thing. He just made it a little simpler, but I would definitely check him out also. So break foot, stop foot. Now softening the position. The one thing you might see is on that break foot especially, as people come in, they step here and it's just a flat foot step that causes the sights to jar and drop, which can equate to time that we're able to shoot the target. So just simply leading with that heel in here and bending down those knees and feel your foot roll on that last step. It may feel like you're getting there a little slower, but because we're prepping the sights to be able to shoot sooner, it's ultimately going to be faster. So really roll that lead foot.
And what I would say too is a lot of folks might take it to the extreme, right? They're hearing you say, hey, lead with that heel, and they might exaggerate a little bit. Some feedback that they're going to get, especially in this kind of surface, is they're going to get that skid right there. If they overstep, right, if they're not getting a solid grounding with that foot, then they'll get that slide there, which obviously is going to throw them off position for getting into that target again.
Fair enough, man. Good point. So Justin, not a lot of people have like a range that they can come out to and practice some of this stuff. Yep. Or if they do, it's limited how often they can do it, right? So is there anything that people can do maybe in the gym, you know, outside of the range that can kind of help them out, like doing some of the stuff, mainly that getting out of position and then, you know, getting that strength into position? Is there anything they can do next time they go to the gym for stuff like that?
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, you know, a lot of times with my program, it's all about transferability, right? How do you take what you're doing in the gym into what you're doing, whether it's on the playing field or in your job or in real life? So real important thing or easy thing is, you know, you were talking about stop foot, break foot. So forward lunges, right, are really going to help with that deceleration right there. So building that strength up. I know a lot of folks tend to skip that on leg day.
Oh, yeah.
Because it doesn't suck on leg day, it sucks the 2 days later.
Yeah, no, I'm feeling it today. So
and then the other thing that I think is often forgotten is the reverse lunge as well, right? So as I'm stepping back, this leg is having to control the movement down, but more importantly, right, once I get the bottom, now I'm going to be driving up, which is going to help out of that exit, out of the position. Another key part of that is going to be ankle mobility, right? You talked early on about getting that shin angle. So any of the exercise, any of the workouts that I'm writing, I'm putting mobility at the front of it. Yep. Right? I always tell them, hey, eat your vegetables, right? So do the important stuff at the beginning of the workout. Right? Key thing would be, you know, you can just do a basic ankle stretch, right? Just focusing on the calf, that sort of thing. I always like the wall drill, which is keeping my toes about 3 inches away from the wall, and I'm gonna take my knee over the little toe, the middle toe, and the big toe.
Okay.
Just getting a couple of reps there on both sides, and then just building that out.
Okay, so with the lunges, right? We see a lot of the times when people do lunges at the gym or just wherever, right? Like I see these lunges, and when they go out, they tend to go out too far like this, and they just kind of like stand up and go forwards. Is there a place like, hey, I want my knee directly over my ankle? Does it benefit us to be forward of that a little bit, but not going over the toes, pushing back, or am I just doing them in a line? You know what I mean? Yeah.
So coaching progression, right? You're going to do shooting drills in the same way. Start with the basics and build up from there. So I'm probably going to start somebody, if I haven't worked with them much, or if they're unfamiliar with it, I'm going to start with just a stationary lunge, right?
Cool.
Feet are set. That way I know I'm nice and stable, and I can just move within that. And then from here, I'll progress into that, okay, now let's move into that step, right? Forward or backward. And then that next step, once they feel confident in finding that position, once they have that ankle mobility that can hold that movement, right, then we can kind of move it into a walking, right, or a moving lunge.
Fair enough. So lunges, do your lunges. You're talking about doing warm-ups at the beginning. So, hey, warm that ankle up, because I see that's the biggest thing, and that's not just running like this, just moving and shooting in general. The stiffer those ankles are, the more people move like real blocky and choppy, you know. When you're talking about trying to be as smooth as possible when you move, one thing we know, the dot's going to move whatever what, but the more ankle mobility you have, the smoother your movement's going to be. And I think that's an overlooked thing. Like, how much hours a day do you spend in a car? Some people it's like 3. What do you do for a living? Well, I sit down all day. You know what I mean? Like all this stuff contributes to that. Warm those ankles up, get those lunges in. Lunges suck, dude. But they're really, really good for you, right? But cool, man. Other than that, yeah, I appreciate it, bud.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
All right. So what are we doing and how we set this up? So me, start that over. I was like, whoa.
What sucks worse than lunges is Bulgarian split squats.
Oh, dude, man, yes. I do those and I feel like a big old puss. I'm like, oh, how much weight am I gonna do? No weight. I'm gonna warm up for a couple sets. Why are you looking at my feet, weirdo?